to the microeconomics series. And in this microeconomics series 7, we are going to discuss on the utility chapter. This is in the continuation with the previous series, and we all know what is utility. Utility is a want satisfying power of a commodity. There have been two approaches to utility, cardinal utility and ordinal utility. In the previous series, I have explained the cardinal utility, that cardinal utility is assigning numeric values to the amount of satisfaction. An ordinal approach has criticized the cardinal approach that utility is a psychological feeling we cannot measure in numeric terms about the utility. So the ordinal approach, in this series, I'll be discussing of the ordinal approach, and this ordinal approach was developed by and propounded by J.R. Hicks and R.J.D.L. in 1934. Actually, previously also, many of the economists had introduced this concept of indifference curve, and this technique was actually originated by Francis Fry Edgeworth in England in 1881. Then it was redefined by Wilfredo Pareto, an Italian economist, in 1906. And after that, it was reformulated and refined in the hands of Professor J.R. Hicks and R.J.D.L. in 1934. They criticized the Marshallian conception of cardinal measurement, that utility can be measured in number terms, and they thought that ordinal approach is the best possible way of measuring utility, because in this ordinal approach, they treated utility as a psychological feeling. A satisfaction is a subjective term which cannot be measured in number terms. So they did not quantify the utility. Rather, they gave the qualitative approach towards the utility, and they told that we can measure the utility through the scale of preference. And for this, they introduced the indifference curve technique. The indifference curve technique had many assumptions. They believed that rational behavior of the consumer, then utility is ordinal, that is, utility cannot be measured in number terms. Then diminishing marginal rate of substitution, which you will come to know in the next coming slides about the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. There was consistency in choice. There was no change in choice. Then transitivity in choice making, that if A is greater than B, B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. And goods consumed are substitutable. That means if you consume any good, two goods, you can substitute one goods for the other. So in a nutshell, the indifference curve is the locus of points representing all the different combinations of two goods which yield equal level of utility to the consumer. And that indifference curve, when represented in the schedule form, it got the name of indifference schedule. So indifference schedule is in this tabular representation, and any combination of A, B, C, D, and E comprising different amounts of apple and mango will give the consumer the same level of satisfaction, because this very combination, when graphically represented, you can see on this chart that A, B, C, D, and E, any point on this one indifference curve will give the same level of satisfaction to the consumer, irrespective of the quantity of apple and mango he is purchasing. When we plot a set of indifference curve on a graph, it is called indifference map, and all the points on one indifference curve will give the same level of satisfaction. But as we move on to higher indifference curve, the higher indifference curve gives the higher level of satisfaction. This is one of the property of indifference curve also, that higher the indifference curve, higher the level of satisfaction. The properties of indifference curve, as I told you, that there are four properties. First is indifference curve have a negative slope because of diminishing marginal rate of substitution. Second, indifference curve never intersect each other. They will break the assumption of transitivity. Indifference curve is convex to the origin for the imperfect substitute goods, and higher indifference curve represents higher level of satisfaction. There is a concept called marginal rate of substitution in the previous slide, and this is the rate at which individual is willing to give up good X for good Y. I mean, one good is substituted for another good, and the rate at which it is substituted, this is called the marginal rate of substitution. And if we see the formula also, that is MUX upon MUY or MUX upon MUY, and this is the additional utility gained from consuming another unit of good X, or vice versa, the additional utility gained from consuming another unit of Y. It is also called law of diminishing marginal rate of substitution because when we see this schedule or graph of it, we'll see that as a consumer gets more and more units of X, he will be giving up less and less units of Y. Or in other words, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y will go on diminishing while the level of satisfaction of the consumer remains the same. This is more important to dot down. Now the question arises, which is the best feasible bundle? Now the tools needed to determine how consumers should allocate their income between two goods is first of all the budget constraint and the indifference curve. And as a consumer, as a normal consumer, we always try to have the highest level of satisfaction for which we go on the higher indifference curve. But there is a constraint. We can move to the highest indifference curve, but our budget, our purchasing capacity is a hindrance for that because we can purchase only those goods according to their prices with the given amount of our income. So the budget constraint measures the combination of purchases that a person can afford to make with a given amount of monetary income. The concept of budget is introduced to the budget line or price line. The budget line is the line which shows different combinations of two commodities that a consumer can purchase given his money income and prices of two commodities. And the slope of price line is equal to price of X upon price of Y. In this schedule, we can see that the income is 4 rupees and there are various combinations of apple and orange which the consumer can purchase from that 4 rupees. The price of apple has been given and the price of orange has been also given. And with this price of apple and orange, we see that the consumer has these combinations of apple and orange 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 6, 4, 2, 0. These are the combinations which the consumer can have from his limited income of rupees 4, keeping into the mind the price of the two goods. So this is the budget line drawn with the help of those schedule, and this budget line, after the budget line, this line, we cannot afford to have goods, and below that we cannot attain the satisfaction, maximum satisfaction, because we are underspending or not spending to the full level of income. So this point, either outside or inside, is not the equilibrium position. The equilibrium should be attained on this very particular budget line. There are two concepts regarding the budget line also, that if there is change in income, if there is increase in income, our budget line will move to rightward because we can purchase both the commodities, we can purchase more of both the commodities. If there is fall in income, we'll purchase less of both the commodities. So in either case, there is change in income, then there is change in the purchasing behavior of the consumer with respect to the two goods. Because in indifference curve, we take consideration only of two goods. The second case, if the price of one commodity changes. So in that, we assume that the other commodity price remains the same. And if the price of, suppose in this case, for apple falls, we are able to purchase more of apples with the same income because the price has fallen. The conditions of consumer equilibrium, first of all, the consumer price line should be tangent to indifference curve, or the slope of indifference curve should be equal to the slope of price line, and indifference curve must be convex to the origin. So we can see that in this, the price line is tangent to the indifference curve, this particular line, and this is the maximum satisfaction which consumer is attaining. And secondly, the indifference curve must be convex to the origin at the point of satisfaction. So this is the point of equilibrium. So the consumer is in equilibrium with the two conditions. First of all, it should be tangent to the budget line, and indifference curve must be convex to the origin at the consumer equilibrium point. Finally, with this schedule, we can see that the consumer seeks a market basket that generates the maximum level of happiness. However, his income and price of the good imposes a limit on the level of satisfaction. Thus, the income at the disposal of the consumer, in conjunction with prices of the commodities, will determine the budgetary constraint or the price line. Concluding this series, there is a last series in which we have concluded with the comparison between ordinal and cardinal approach, because we have already discussed about the ordinal and cardinal approach and what the difference is between the two approaches. We can now explicitly tell about, because we have studied both the ordinal and cardinal approach. So ordinal approach is a approach which can be in which utility cannot be measured as compared to the cardinal utility. Secondly, this is more realistic approach because we are having a qualitative measurement of utility and as respect to cardinal utility. And so we conclude with this conclusion that the ordinal utility approach was more practical approach rather than cardinal utility, though we cannot deny the fact that cardinal utility had stated a very important fact that the law of diminishing marginal utility, that as we consume more and more of a good, the utility or the satisfaction which we derive goes on diminishing. So with this approach, we also come to know that utility has a distinct value of diminishing behavior, that our consumption with the successive unit of consumption goes on declining, though the cardinal approach had stated a very important tenet of utility or satisfaction. The ordinal approach was also not wrong, I should say. The ordinal approach gave a more practical solution to the utility because we all know that utility is a psychological feeling and it is very difficult to measure utility. So both the concepts are right from certain point of view because in ordinal approach, when we analyze the criticism, our consumption is never restricted to only two goods because in the indifference curve analysis, it was restricted to combination of two goods. So there are many criticism of both the approach. If we take both the approach at the same time, that will be more beneficial for us. Thank you, students. Connect with me in the next series of economics. Thank you very much.